This is AP Lit. We're doing some review for the exam next week, and we just read a poem called Since There's No Help. And notice what they're asking you. The big question is the dramatic, how does the poet use techniques to develop the dramatic situation? For me, I always like to think the big picture. What does this mean? It didn't ask you what it meant. They'll do that with longer works, sometimes with shorter ones. It seems like with the poems, the questions are usually more narrow, like the dramatic situation or the relationship between one thing and another. But I always like to think, if you have a whole poem, what is the meaning of it? So I always like to go there. And it gives you some suggestions as to the techniques that you can use. So who would like to get us started? What did you notice, like, in front of you? What have you said? Sarah, you want to start for us?
Sure. I think the most, like, obvious answer for his technique to, like, emphasize the dramatic situations of the poem is how he, like, personifies love, passion, faith, and innocence, and how they're dead now. I just think, like, I don't know, the idea of someone saying this to, like, someone who broke their heart is really funny to me. Be like, well, love's dead, passion is dead, and
But is it dead?
it's dying.
Yes, that's really important,
Yeah.
right? It's not completely dead. There's still a chance.
Yeah, and, like, I don't know, the idea of them shaking hands is really funny to me too. Like, let's just shake hands, and if we ever see each other again, don't make it obvious that we were once in love.
Well, this is kind of odd, because you just talked about a very serious poem, love is dying, and then you talked about something that, kind of funny. So how in the world could one poem contain both of those?
Well, there's like after, it starts with this, like, kind of comical thing that he's talking about, and then it just shifts to
Right.
him saying that love, passion, faith, and innocence are all dying.
Why would we expect a shift in a poem like this?
I think it's like, yeah.
Say it again.
It's a song.
It's a sign. So there's got to be a shift at some point. If you finish what you were going to say.
I was gonna say it's a, like, and, in sonnets there's, like, problem solution, and this one it seems like the first part is him, like, talking to her, and then afterwards it's like she's already gone.
Can you be specific when you say the first part?
Like, the first 9 lines are him. It sounds like he's, like, talking to her in the first 9 lines, and then afterwards there's this shift now at the last gasp of love's latest
So
breath.
I counted 8 lines. So what would you call that, again, to give it a specific name?
I don't know what it's called.
Octagon, octopus, what would you call it? Sestet and octave. Again, they're not, I put a big X on this one, I'm not reading anymore. They're not gonna do that with these essays. But I'm just saying, if you know it, show it. If you have it, flaunt it. You know what I mean? Show them, show off. I know what this is called. I mean, it may be obvious that look at this, I'm using the word octave. Now that would count on the multiple choice if they're asking you. It wouldn't be that simple, unfortunately. But so please, you said several things that we can use. You can use next week if you got a sonnet. The shift, the 8 lines, the octave. What's the other part called? Sestet. Yeah. Again, when you're writing an essay, they don't necessarily care what you call it, but on the multiple choice, that might win you some points. So, all right, where do we go from there? Who's next? Karen?
So this is kind of similar to what Sarah said, but the first part, he's, like, really resigned. He's just like, all right, he's kind of determined. He just wants to end it, move on with his life, whatever. And he uses a lot of first person in the first part. He says, like, nay, I have done, you get no more of me. But then in the second half, he never uses first person at all. It's all just personification.
So what conclusion can you draw there?
I think the first part, to me, kind of seemed like he was, like, angry or something, so it was like he in the moment. And then the second part, he's, like, reflecting on what he said and what he did.
And if you use a lot of I and me, anyway, what does that say about you?
You're kind of self-centered.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about him, and then he drops it. Yeah, good point. Again, the question is, how would you handle this paper if you had to write it? Yeah, Eli, is that your book?
Oh, no.
You can answer it if you want to.
What was the question?
Yeah, that, anybody, we can come back to you. I'm just asking, how would you handle this topic, the dramatic situation and the techniques that are used? Yeah.
Well, I just noticed the tone, like, in the first lines, I feel like, kind of like what Kieran was saying, he's a little more self-centered, maybe a little more prideful, like he's trying to act like he doesn't care that much.
What do you mean, act like he doesn't? How do you know he's acting like he doesn't? He does
Because-
care, but he's acting like he doesn't.
Because then in the next 6 lines, and then actually finally in like the last line, he says, maybe we can save this. So he kind of, in the beginning, puts on a show of being like fine with what's happening, and then later, or later on in the poem, he's just realizes that he would like to save the relationship.
And the contrast, Kat last period pointed this out, the contrast is what highlights that. The fact that that's a technique. It doesn't mention that, but it's a technique, using contrast, using however you want to describe the first section to the second section, putting them together is what creates the point that he's making. He is trying. Now, I think it would be important for somebody to tell us what techniques does he use to pretend he doesn't care when we know he does care. Yeah, I don't know if that's what you want to answer, but.
Sure. I think that it sort of going on, I think I agree with what Marie and Karen were saying. It seems like during the first 8 lines, he's very aggressively just acting like he's fine, and I think that you can see that just in how dramatic he's being, like how done everything else, like how finite I guess he's making everything seem, and then he sort of goes back on it, so I think it's kind of a combination of how at the beginning he's so, like, fervent in what he's trying to say.
You're saying he overdoes it, right?
Right,
And that's
yeah.
what gives him away?
But I think his overdoing it gives him away a little bit, but if he didn't have the last part where he kind of backtracks a little bit.
Yes.
It wouldn't be as clear. But at the end, at the beginning, he says there's no help. He says it twice, because it's also the title.
And look at the very last, anybody notice the very last line?
Yeah, at the end, he's like, oh, but actually, there might, you can do something to fix this.
Yeah, very good, Nathan.
Well, she actually sort of covered things out. She's gonna talk about how the title makes it, he's making it sound like it was inevitable at the
Yeah.
beginning. There was nothing that could possibly be done to stop it. And then it was like, oh, maybe something.
You're telling me there's a chance. You know, he's sort of hoping that. Any other thing about the technique? I keep pressing that because I think that's what they're definitely asking. So what are the techniques he uses to make it sound like he doesn't care when he really does care? He's overdoing it, but what are some words you could use to describe the techniques that he's using? Anybody notice the rhythm? They mentioned rhythm. How does the rhythm contrast? Without going into anything technical, you don't have to go, it's this kind of rhythm meter. How is the meter, the rhythm in both sections different? I did have somebody notice this. Anybody want to give a stab at that? They pointed out that there's lots of interruptions. Since there's no help, comma, let us kiss and part, period. Nay, comma, I have done, comma, you get no of me, semicolon, and I'm glad, comma, yea, comma, glad with all my heart. Bam, 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 bam. There's something about that seems, he's angry, he's short, I think short bursts, as opposed to now at the last gasp of love's latest breath, when pulse, he slows down, the rhythm slows down because he's serious now. So that would be one way to discuss. They've asked you to consider that. Anything else about the first part? Again, we talked about diction all year. What kind of diction have you got at the top that changes? I mean, just very basic difference in diction is what? How would you describe it? Well, I think you know the answer to this, you're just afraid that, you're not sure it fits in the way I've said it. Formal versus informal. The first part is all, notice all the cliches, kiss and part, I have done, had no more of me, shake hands. All these are, Kat mentioned, it's all almost like a business deal. Let's kiss and part. No, let's just shake hands on it. He goes from kissing to shaking hands. So it's using cliches, things that come to your brain. Repetition. What does repetition always do? You see where he repeats? I am glad, yay, glad with all my heart. That's not enough to say I'm glad. He has to add to it. Yay, glad with all my heart. He just thought of that, so I think I'll add that. Doesn't it sound insincere? Now, repetition always emphasizes something, but here it sounds like somebody mentioned last period, he's trying to convince himself. These are all things you could talk about in that first section to describe the techniques. Party, no hope, no force. It's forced, it's casual, a lot of interruption, a lot of short bursts like he's angry, and versus the other side. So we've mentioned the title, we've mentioned the tone, I think you mentioned the tone, didn't you, Marie? And words like forced or casual or insincere. Figurative language, we talked about the formal personification. The rhythm, we talked about that. Any other poetic elements? Well, the structure, that's not a necessarily poetic element, but the structure of a sonnet. One thing that I do a lot of recommendations and like the recognitions at the end of the year, and I'll take notes just like you do. And I felt this after I did this, I took the notes and I said, well, is that all I've got? And my first reaction was, that's not a lot. Of course, what happens when you put these into the essay, you begin to elaborate on it. But I just don't think your paper's gonna have any structure if you don't make some effort. 5 minutes, that's not enough, that's not a lot, but it's, out of 40, that's not a lot, but it's something. Okay, I'm gonna try this. Anything else about, and you knew this poem, we've actually read this poem. Any other thoughts about that? All right, we're not gonna do the prose thing today since we did one yesterday. Let's turn to the last one. And the last one is, whatever, I don't know, I can't remember what they call it. Open-ended, they're all open-ended, it's not like multiple choice, but whatever they call it. Maybe this is your knock it out of the park essay. So you need to do this one first. That's what those data sheets are for, is you to really nail down the books you want to use. So how about 5 minutes, read the prompt, pick a book, it doesn't have to be on the list, and take your notes and see what you can come up with. Again, I believe it does say, illustrate the meaning of the work as a whole. You can't avoid it. I've been reminding you of that all year. You've got to tell us, what does this book mean? What is the basic idea that you get out of this book? 5 minutes.
How,
Yeah.
for a question like this, would we be allowed to use like plays like Merchant of Venice or something, or does it have to be novel?
We actually, someone used Merchant of Venice last week. Shakespeare, yeah. Crucible, Death of a Salesman, you know, all those are legitimate.
There's plays on the list. The first thing that it says from a novel or play was. Hamlet's a play.
Close reading. Well, why don't we see what you came up with. Mason, I'd like to hear what you think. So again, all I want is, the question, what is it? The question is, meaning of the work as a whole, the risk, the motivation for the risk, and how it fits in with the meaning of the work. So, how did you handle that?
So I decided to talk about Les Mis, and I talked about the risk Jean Valjean took to go back and get Cassette, even though Javert was trying to track him down and throw him back in prison, and how are we making so this highlights the book's meaning of redemption, because Jean Valjean himself had needed redemption his whole life, and then he saw that Cassette had sort of, she hadn't been thrown away by her mother, but her mother hadn't been there with her all the time, and so he went back and tried to help her out, and it shows how your past doesn't determine your future, which both those are big meanings of the book.
I like the way you captured the big idea. I think that's really important. You got it. You didn't ask for it. A lot of times I've noticed that some of you avoid that when you write their papers, and it said there, meaning of the work though. I'm looking for it, particularly early. If you don't put it early, you may forget to put it in at all. Like in your thesis, that should govern your paper. That should be the idea that drives the entire paper. What is this book about? And now I'll address these specific things that contribute to that. Yeah, Emily.
Well, I chose the Odyssey, and for the character I chose Penelope, Odysseus' wife. And I said that a risk was entertaining her suitors and believing that her husband would be back soon, even though she had no reason to believe that he would be back any sooner than she thought 2 years before. And I said that action posed a risk to her happiness, her son's happiness, her fidelity to her husband, and the fate of their island. And I thought that illuminated the theme of hope and the vigor of the human spirit.
I like all that. Very good. And remember, the paper would be looking at what you just kind of addressed. You addressed was, what is the risk? What's the motivation for the risk? And then, of course, your paper's going to expect details that support that. And I like the big idea, the idea of hope, and you never get faith. 20 years. She didn't give up on it, the guy. How about it? What did you?
I did the same thing as Nixon.
The same book?
Yeah, I said that Jean Valjean risked his life, disguised himself so he could avoid prison and Javert's discovery. He wanted to follow through his vow to promise to take care of Cosette and become his father figure, basically. And then I also said it illuminated the meaning of redemption, forgiveness, and then justice versus the law for Javert. And that Jean Valjean just wants to return your bishop's favor on him so he can help the book and help others.
And I would just, for both those, since you both used a similar thing, it's really good, I would go a step further to know that a theme is not a meaning. So for instance, if you say the meaning is redemption, and I think that's really good, you're still really just talking about a theme. What does this book show you about redemption? Like what do you learn about redemption? Lots of books can be about redemption. They show different things about it. I would just challenge you to make sure that you don't just stop at some big idea, hope, or redemption. But what is this particular book? How does it treat that thing? What did you learn from this thing that another book doesn't say exactly that same thing? How about it? But
I said Huck Finn and how Huck escapes from him.
what would you say the meaning, I've heard things like, well, lots of things, good things, but sort of narrow it in a little bit down to what did this book teach you about this particular, about innocence or about society or what?
Probably like the impact of society on children and, yes,
On who?
like how children raising them.
And maybe you could, Huck, and what do Huck and Jim have in common? The least of these. The people at the, how we treat the people at the lowest level of a society says a lot about our society. And that book does address that, and freedom is a part of that. Very good. What about it, Liam?
Well, I read about the Merchant of Venice, and I said that the risk was when Portia decided to act as Antonio's lawyer against Shylock. And I said she cared for Antonio himself and also Antonio's friend, who I can't remember the name of. I know it started with a B, but I don't remember the name of it. So,
Well, if you like the book, please look that up this week and put it on the sheet so that you would know it.
What is it?
yeah, I can't remember the name.
Bassanio.
But I said that the consequence she was taking from this risk was that if she wasn't able to win the case, Antonio would die, and if she was caught as a woman acting as a man, Antonio would die and she would also be in trouble. And I said that this illuminates the meaning of the book of kindness and mercy, as Antonio had done a lot for Portia and Bassanio, and even in the end they ended up giving mercy to Shylock.
So what big picture about meaning would you say, like, we'd be getting, one thing occurred to me, did you, because you kind of said it, she's a woman, obviously, as a lawyer, that's kind of unusual, right? So was there an element of, like, I don't like the word feminism necessarily, but this is a woman stepping out of the structure of society, and the bad guy was Jewish, which is interesting because Shakespeare gets criticized for the way he treats. She probably mentioned that Shylock is kind of a stereotype. He's stingy and all these things that unfortunately have been associated stereotypically. But what would you say the meaning? Like, what is the?
I said the meaning was mercy and kindness.
What about mercy? Take it a step. What did you learn about mercy? What does the book, this particular story, teach you about mercy and kindness?
That everyone deserves mercy, no matter how evil, like everybody can be redeemed, I guess.
Well, see, that's you took it a step further, which I think is you've got to do, and I like it. It wasn't hard to do that either. How about at least another one? We could go on. I just like, how about it, Sophia?
Yeah, I did the same
I
thing.
still got it in my head, Sophia. That's to be stuck there.
I did the same thing that Clayton did, Huck then. So I said Huck's risk is that he ran away from home, family, and then the ideas society tried to force onto him. And then he took these risks knowing that his abusive father could come after him, knowing that he would disappoint the women in his life since he took Jim with him, and then also knowing that he would just disappoint society since he kind of opposed their ideas. And then his motivation was to pursue freedom. And then even though he doesn't really realize it, to also break society's racial views since he formed a bond with Jim that kind of seemed like an appropriate relationship because they were a different skin tone. And then overall this kind of changes his perspective, which again opposes all these ideas of his upbringing and what society believes. And so he kind of realizes that your skin tone, especially getting to know Jim, that doesn't determine your intelligence or status.
And there's a lot there, and would you say freedom is the biggest idea that you, so what does the book teach you about freedom? You don't have to answer it now, but like Liam just did, what does this book teach you about freedom? It seemed like a lot of things, whether it's racial or bad parents, whatever, that freedom is the bigger issue, and it covers both, just about everything in the book, which is what you're looking for. You're looking for an idea that covers the most ground. You don't want one so narrow it only applies to this little segment of the book. You want an idea that covers the whole book. Anything you could say about what did this book teach about freedom?
I guess instead of just like living in the situation that you're in, to pursue freedom because it's the right thing, not necessarily, I don't really know.
Yeah, well, that would be, again, between now and the test, if you're gonna use a book, can you take it that next step? Because I think that's gonna be impressive to them. You know what's going on here. Any book we hadn't mentioned, don't have to go into the whole thing. All right, so good job. One more thing, yeah.
Question, so, in seventh grade, we read the book The Giver, is that considered like of prestige, or is that just like not a good?
I would be a little bit, since it was the seventh grade and you read it. However, Red Badger Courage can be read in the seventh grade too. So it's one of those, I'm not so sure, it's definitely a classic. You know, I've never read it, but I know it's a classic. So I would just put that kind of warning. Would you get out the other sheets that I gave you? If you have 10 minutes. I've been trying the best way to know how to handle this. What you have a glossary of terms. You have the list of terms we've been working through. We got, I think, the 40. Remember, where they're not gonna ask you questions about these terms. These terms are gonna show up, and you don't know how or where. And if you know them, that's probably an advantage. You don't know them, that's not the end of the deal. So knowing them is helpful. It's not essential. Like I said, if you don't call it an octave or sestet, did we say that here? Didn't we just say that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, remember if that was the last, if you don't know to call it that, when you're writing it, they don't care. You say they're 8 here, they're 6 here. However, in the multiple choice, that might be useful. And I think you could figure that out. If you see the word octave standing up there, you're smart enough to know we studied it. There it is. That's the right answer. So I was just gonna go through here. What I'd like you to do is what I'm gonna do with you right now. I'd like you to go through here and highlight the words you simply don't remember, knowing them might help, and then looking them up here. But what I was gonna go through is showing the ones that, you might fit in your list. For instance, some of these I'm gonna assume you should know, but you may not know. For instance, number 4 and 5, anapest, it's a metrical foot. It'd probably be helpful to look over that, but they're not gonna ask you to scan anything. I don't even know if they're gonna ask you, I can't imagine them asking you something that detailed, but if you don't remember it, anapest, isn't that unaccented, accented, anapest? It's sort of like the word itself contains the anaphora. You remember that one? Starts with the same word. That could be useful. I'm just doing the ones that I'm thinking you might not know. Antithesis, you probably know what that means. It's a broad word. It could be useful. Apostrophe, everything William Blake wrote, it seemed like everything the Romantics did, they used apostrophes to address the season, or address the idea, or address the dead Milton, or, they were always doing that. Archetype, that's a word I can never remember. I don't know why. And you know what it means? Remember, it's a term that, anybody remember? Yeah.
It's like a type of story that you could fit any story into, like any characters, like you could change the setting or the situation.
And it could be a character. It could be a symbol, anything that just is just like this collection of, let me go to the archetype drawer and pick one out. This is what all authors go to this drawer from the beginning of time, and they have these particular, everybody uses it. All right, I think I'll pull this one out and use it. It's been used since Adam and Eve, That's an archetype. Assonance, just remember, assonance is vowel. Repetition of vowel, not rhyme. I mean, assonance is probably used in conjunction with rhyme, but you can separate assonance from rhyme. And usually, ascendatine is no conjunctions, right? Polysyndeton is lots of conjunctions. A ballad, remember the several ballads we wrote? We read the Ode to Billy Joe, the Ballad of the Goodly Fear. They have a certain rhythm to them. Remember, they're about common people, usually, their story. That's why Billy Joe, throwing stuff off that Chattahoochee Bridge, that's a typical ballad kind of setting. It's just an ordinary place. Blank verse, what do you know about blank verse? No rhyme, right? Is that what you just said? Well, what is the meter? The free verse is no wrong, but what's the meter of blank verse? Shakespeare, what? Iambic pentameter, it's like the only one you really need to remember. If you could, whatever they ask you about, I'm being facetious, if they ask you anything about meter, the answer is iambic pentameter. I mean, that's not the right answer necessarily, but it's gonna cover a lot of ground. Chiasmus, remember that one? You don't, do you? You do, because you're Latin.
It's in Latin too,
It
so that's-
reverses the ordered word.
Can you give an example?
But
I can't either, so I shouldn't be asking you. Oh, let's look it up. Chiasmus, it's right here.
free, love is free.
It's not right here.
She has all my love is hers.
Yeah, that's it. It's not on your list. A lot of good the list gonna do you. I'm just kidding. The list is still helpful. It's from one of the 8 books, but it's having two things in a series, and then you reverse those two things. Conceit. Conceit and 34 extended metaphor mean the same thing in a sense. It's just a fancy metaphor. It's that compass thing that John Donne talked about, the compass, and you are the fixed point, and I do circles around you, and you just went on and on about it. That's a conceit. I think they had competitions to see who could make the most sophisticated comparison between two. Oh, you can't find anything in common with those two. Say, oh yeah, look at me. And they find that two things that don't seem to have anything in common, and they make a connection. That sort of was the style of John Donne's era. All right, connotation and denotation. Basic, remember for diction, and we'll go over that tomorrow and Monday. Maybe we could look at, remember the basic diction, D for denotation. I'm sorry.
Please pardon the interruption. All sophomore boys, please go to the forum for break for a meeting with Mr. Schilling. Again, all sophomore boys, please go to the forum for break for a meeting with Mr. Schilling. And any junior boys that are interested in being part of the presentation on Saturday, please come to the student activity office. Thank you.
Write this down, just a reminder, LEAD, that might come back to you when you see diction. Low, remember what it means? LEAD?
Low, elevated.
The D, L-E-A, what's the A? And the D?
Diction.
Well, it's denotation. The whole thing involves diction, but the A stands for abstract and its opposite, concrete. The D stands for denotation and its opposite, connotation. Remember, authors like to use words that have multiple denotations and an infinite amount of connotations. When you think of the word mother, you think of your mother. And every person who's ever had a mother, which is every person, comes up with a different thought. That's why connotations are so powerful. So that's what I want you to do. We'll spend some time on that tomorrow. And we'll look forward to finishing it up. So you may leave. Yeah, you want? No.
It's annoying because it's like fighting off a bunch of ninjas and it's so quick to move the chains.
Red Sox or Oh, you are. That's one enough? What? I don't have any time. Yeah, but it's been not been going for that long. What if? What?
I saw some videos though, and it looks like it's
Has a short base. Because they were already out of it, so they just did this guy was going 50 miles per hour. Fastball. And then you look at a game like that.
Yeah, it turns out there was an even smaller one.
They just- These are major league players. You can get a hit. And then score, right?
Are the data sheets due tomorrow or?
Yeah, I said tomorrow, but I'll take, I took the last period, one tomorrow, and, I didn't put that we'll talk about it. If you don't have to,
Okay,
I'll
sounds
put it
good.
up there.
Appreciate it.